Much for joining us on the program. We now move over to Europe for our next story, where Russian President Vladimir Putin says NATO's planned defense boost poses no threat to Russia. He insists Moscow is fully capable of defending itself and continues to modernize its armed forces. Putin said the comments ahead of a NATO summit where allies may raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. He says this spending is unnecessary and won't alter the military balance. Let's take a listen in to his full statements.
Чего бы НАТО ни делало, конечно, это создает определенные угрозы, но мы купируем все эти угрозы, которые будут возникать. Здесь нет никаких сомнений. В этом смысле любые перевооружения и увеличение бюджетов до 5% от ВВП стран НАТО не имеют никакого смысла. Поэтому мы рассматриваем на сегодняшний день Федеративную Республику, так же, как многие другие европейские страны, не как нейтральное государство, а как сторону, поддерживающую Украину. А в некоторых случаях, пожалуй, как соучастников этих.
Now to Ukraine. Putin says Russian troops now have a strategic advantage and are advancing daily along the front line. He claims this progress will continue. Putin has questioned Ukrainian President Zelensky's legitimacy, citing the expiry of his 5-year term under martial law. Still, he says he's ready to meet Zelensky, but only during a final phase of negotiations. Here's what he had to say.
Я готов встречаться со всеми, в том числе и с Зеленским. Да, вопрос не в этом. Если украинское государство доверяет кому-то вести переговоры, ради бога, пускай это будет Зеленский. Вопрос не в этом. Вопрос, кто будет подписывать документ. Я даже готов встречаться. Но если это будет какой-то завершающий этап, чтобы не сидеть там и что-то делить бесконечно, так, а поставить точку. Но точку надо, подпись должна стоять легитимных властей.
Meanwhile, Russia continues to reject Ukraine's terms for peace and demands more territory and security guarantees. Kyiv calls those demands unacceptable and accuses Moscow of prolonging the war deliberately. Putin also warned Germany that spending long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine would destroy bilateral ties. He claims such weapons will not change the outcome of the war. Meanwhile, Ukrainian flags were lowered in mourning after a deadly Russian missile strike in Kyiv. At least 28 civilians were killed and scores were injured. Putin denies targeting civilian areas despite overwhelming evidence from recent attacks. We're now joined by Shruti Dasgupta, who is a foreign affairs expert, to discuss this in more detail. Shruti, thank you very much for joining us. Shruti, President Putin says NATO's possible move to raise defense spending to 5% proves no threat to Moscow. How credible is that claim?
Greetings, Tom. Thank you for having me on your show. It's very simple. No matter how much money you pour into Zelensky's pockets, he himself has stated that a very small fraction actually makes it to Ukraine, because most of it goes into various defense armaments pockets, does not go to the benefit of Ukraine and its war. So from 2% to 5%, when they start talking about these kind of terms, it doesn't really bother Putin too much, because he knows that he has the advantage. No matter how many missiles you supply to Ukraine, there have to be people who know how to fire them. Until and unless EU, as in Germany, and as well as UK, France, they put their men behind those missiles, it doesn't really affect Putin too much. And he does seem to have the ground advantage. He has been advancing in Sumy. He has struck industrial complexes. The apartment blocks that Ukraine claims that have been taken, Russia on its side says that they are the places where these drone manufacturing facilities, designs, etc. were taking place. So for them, it's fairly easy to kind of pin Ukraine to the board and say that please behave. And so I don't really think that the increase in defense expenditure is much of a threat, but it would increase the nuisance of the war for Putin, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, and Shruti, Vladimir Putin questions President Zelensky's legitimacy under martial law, but says he's open to meetings in the final phase. Is that a genuine olive branch or a tactic to delay Ukrainian counteroffensives?
No, I think this is exactly what Putin feels like. He's always stated that Zelensky does not have the signing power. He does not see Zelensky as a leader of Ukraine. If I want to backtrack a little, I think it stems from the fact that Zelensky's rise as the president comes from the Orange Revolution and the people's movement and protest that happened, which kind of pulled Ukraine away from its pro-Russian roots. So before that, Ukraine was like sometimes pro-Russian, like, and sometimes anti, but not completely as averse as Zelensky put it in. So he sees Zelensky as a NATO plant who has managed to gain power through various fair meals and foul. And despite there being a war, Russia held elections everywhere in 2024, including Crimea, which is a disputed state as of now, according to EU. So they are holding elections everywhere and affirming that Putin is the people's choice, whereas Zelensky is just saying it's too much of an emergency and I cannot hold elections. I cannot send my people out there to collect votes or even go for voting and then have them face missiles or bullets or guns. So for Zelensky is using the people perspective to evade elections. And so Putin has put him on the has again pinned him to the board by saying that he does not represent Ukrainians until unless he holds an election and proves himself to be the voice of Ukraine. He does understand that since the elections have not been held, Zelensky continues to be the signing power of Ukraine. So although he will not have direct peace conversations with him, whoever wants to mediate, he welcomes them on the table and wants to end the war with genuine terms that will show lasting peace rather than a temporary pause. So he's looking forward to something like that, and he will accept Zelensky as the last signing power, but not the mediating power. Because we need to understand that this war may sound like a Ukraine and Russia war, but it isn't. It is mostly a NATO pseudo-war occurring on the soil of Ukraine. And that is what Putin has put forward many times before in his statements.
Shruti, Putin has once again reiterated that he doesn't target civilian infrastructure. Yet, just a couple of days ago, we saw a devastating attack on the capital of Ukraine, of Kyiv, that has now claimed 28 civilian lives in the Ukrainian capital. This comes as a sort of theme. We saw a terrible attack on the city of Sumy, where 34 people were killed. More of eastern Ukrainian cities, Kharkiv, etc. What does this say about Putin's ambitions for peace? What are your thoughts? We have a possible meeting on the 22nd of this month after this successful prisoner swap earlier this week. How do you think those possible peace talks in Istanbul are going to go, given the state of the war?
First, let's just backtrack a little. Let's just look at the amount of munitions Putin said he sent forth, and then talk about the number of lives, civilian lives, that Ukraine claims it takes. If there were really 400 drones fired off and 150 apartment complexes that were targeted, and the number of civilians that Ukraine is now putting forth is just about 28, 30, those seem like a very distorted number to the amount of attack that had been fired from Russia's side. So, of course, they landed. That means these are only the collateral damages that Ukraine is willing to acknowledge. They are not acknowledging the actual military damage. And that can be the reason for these skewed numbers, because the number of armaments fired to the number of lives lost seems to have a mismatch. And that is something that we all need to consider as part of fog of war. There is going to be collateral damage, and that is the only number that Zelensky seems to be acknowledging. If you earlier referred to a successful the dead soldier trade-off, that was not so successful. The 6,000 was the number that Russia had claimed that they have in their possession, and Ukraine didn't take all of them. And so it was like a barely partially acceptable version that they took. I think they took a few hundreds off, but didn't claim the entire number. So it's not a successful trade-off in terms of dead soldiers. They did swap prisoners, I believe. I may be wrong. You can correct me later. But this is something I'm not very. This doesn't sound very nice in terms of Kyiv. They're projecting numbers for civilian damage only, so that it looks like that Putin is the aggressor, and an aggressor with no particular point except obliterating Ukraine off the map of EU. But that is not exactly what Russia is doing. Russia is slowly and steadily gaining territory, which is what its final aim is, because it does not want to be landlocked outside of the Black Sea by NATO forces. And that's why it's important for it to have access to that particular region that it wants to trade off now on the peace deals. So when there is going to be a peace conversation in Istanbul, which were cancelled and then reheld and then cancelled and reheld, it is basically a diplomatic tug of war that is happening. I think there is a chance when somebody who understands Putin's point of view, rather than just views him as an all-out aggressor, comes forth and talks, and that might actually result in peace for the region. And of course, I have always said that it is Zelensky's ego that is stopping the peace from happening, because every time something there is a chance or possibility of Putin gaining ground and the EU willing to listen to him, and they're tired of the war that has lasted for more than 1,200 days, he goes ahead and does something stupid. So it is a very fragile state, of course, and with each member of the NATO trying to arm twist Russia into listening to them, it is going to continue until unless they understand that Putin is not going to bow. He needs what he needs from Ukraine, whether you give it to him on a peace talk table or whether he takes it from you using the weapons. That's exactly the end line of this.
Shruti Das Gupta, thank you very much for your insight. Pleasure having you on the programme. For our